Right, including the fact that, given the fact that when they describe this guy as a creepy guy, they're not saying his name. So it's somebody that they're completely unfamiliar with. Obviously, somebody like a Brian Laundrie that's from out of town, they don't know who he is, so they don't know who to say is bothering them. So if it was somebody that they worked with or somebody that, they were neighbors with, they'd say, hey, Bob is bothering us, we're going to move or something.
Welcome to Reporter Room, where we seek truth and justice. My name is Jessica Della Davies. I'm an investigative journalist. Today, we're going to talk about the connections of Brian Laundrie to the mysterious murders of a Moonflower Grocery employee, Kylen Schulte, and her wife, Crystal Turner. Let's get into it. The investigation into the death of Gabby Petito continues, along with the search for unofficial suspect number 1, Brian Laundrie. Brian drove home, leaving Gabby's remains in Utah. He ran home to his parents' house in Florida, a home which he shared with Gabby prior to their road trip. Brian arrived driving Gabby's van with Gabby's cell phone and illegally using Gabby's credit card, allegedly. The parents' first response was not to report Gabby missing on September 1st when Brian arrived, but to hire an attorney, Stephen Bertolino. They also enjoyed a camping weekend at Fort DeSoto State Park, because everyone knows when your loved one goes missing, you go camping. Before we go any further in this case, it's moving super fast, so please take a moment to subscribe and like this video. Clues connecting Brian to the unsolved murder of Kylen and Crystal continue to emerge, leading many to speculate that Brian is a serial killer. Moab is a small town in Utah with around 5,000 residents. What do you think the odds are that 3 murders occur in a tiny town within weeks of each other? Now, a private investigator hired by Kylen Schulte's father, Sean Paul, reveals that Brian is on his list of potential suspects. Crystal and Kylen were found gunned down in the South Mesa area of Loop Road in LaSalle. They were last seen on August 13th at Woody's Tavern, just minutes from the Bowen Motel, where Brian was placed by police after the August 12th Moab police stop. This is the stop that we've seen on the body cam footage. Now, internet sleuths are working hard bringing to light alleged evidence that may incriminate Brian in the deaths of Kylen and Crystal. Do you believe that Gabby's death could be connected to Kylen and Crystal? Utah police said that they were investigating potential connections between the 2 high-profile cases, which occurred within a few weeks of each other. Police later stated that the deaths were not related, but it hasn't stopped people from speculating that Brian has a connection to both cases. Jason Jensen, the private investigator hired by Kylen's dad, Sean Paul, differs with police. Jensen stated to News Now about Brian's connection to the deaths of Kylen and Crystal, "Until we can prove that he was out of the area, he has to be considered until he is adequately ruled out." Jensen also points out that it's unclear where Brian was from August 13th, and he says this is the date that the women were last seen. We know Brian hightailed it to his parents' home in Northport, Florida on August 17th. This was just one day after Kylen and Crystal were reported missing. The one person who knew where Brian was August 13th through the 17th was Gabby Petito, and she's no longer with us. So what do you think about Brian running home after Gabby was murdered? Did he also run home August 17th after Kylen and Crystal were reported missing for the same reason? Authorities have not produced any other suspects in the investigation into the deaths of Kylen and Crystal. Not a single suspect. Meanwhile, Brian has been named a person of interest in the homicide of Gabby. If you haven't watched part 1 and part 2 of this series, Is Brian a Serial Killer? I will link them for you in the description below. Keys were reportedly found near where Kylen and Crystal were left. They were found by Cindy Sue Hunter. Cindy Sue Hunter is a friend of Jean Paul, who is Kylen's dad, and these keys may provide a critical link to Brian Laundrie. Online sleuths claim that a set of keys found near Kylen and Crystal's bodies had a membership card for a rock climbing gym attached to them. Is this why the FBI went back a second time to get Brian's DNA? The keys were reportedly given to Kylen's father, who turned them into the police after having to carry out his own search of the area. It's worth noting that Kylen's father had to enlist the help of friends to find Kylen and Crystal. Why weren't the police looking for them? Why did Jean Paul have to ask friends to find the two women? Cindy Sue Hunter found the women in her first day of looking, and she is a layperson, not a trained investigator. I give Cindy Sue so much credit for her sleuthing. Some doubters have been quick to dismiss internet sleuths, but I want to remind everyone that it was Red, White, and Bethune YouTubers who were instrumental in finding Gabby's van, which led authorities to Gabby's remains. The Petito family took the time to thank everyone on social media for their assistance. I'm sharing this with you because amateur and online sleuths have been crucial to this investigation and should not be ruled out or simply dismissed. On Brian's Instagram, he shared an image of himself assisting a child at a rock climbing gym where some claim he once worked. Izzy tweeted out this image, writing, "I believe this was the key/card thing he found. If it's any consolation, Brian Laundrie worked at a rock climbing place if you interpret the logo to be a rock climber. Just a theory." We also now know that Brian returned home to Florida from Utah on August 17th, one day before Kylen and Crystal's bodies were found and one day after they were reported missing. First, Laundrie parent attorney Stephen Bertolino said it was in order to empty out a storage unit to save money. But when people began pointing out that airfare and putting Gabby in a hotel for 6 days was way more costly than it would be to keep the storage unit open, the story changed, and it was changed to Brian had a fight with Gabby and needed some items from his storage locker. What items? Were keys one of the items? Or was Brian running away after Crystal and Kylen were reported missing? Brian lies. In fact, Brian lied to the Moab police on August 12th after a witness called 911 to report the fact that he was slapping Gabby. Brian stated to police, quote, "She got worked up and had her phone in her hand and her rings, and I had the keys. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't have my phone. I don't have a phone, so if she goes off without me on a car ride, I'm on my own. I said, let's just go for a walk, and she was trying to get the keys from me." But here's a photo from the Moab police body cam footage of Brian pulling out a cell phone from his pocket. Also, later in the interview with police, after officers have decided it's Gabby's fault and decide not to bring charges against Brian or Gabby, and instead ask them to separate for one night, Brian's asked for his phone number, so they definitely knew he had a cell phone. And despite saying that he didn't have a phone 40 minutes earlier, Brian takes the phone out of his pocket and hands it over to police. So Brian lied to police officers. So why would Brian kill Kylen and Crystal? Oh, Brian had a motive, in my opinion. Brian knew someone called 911 on him on August the 12th, and that was the reason for the Moab police stop that resulted in him having to sleep at the Bowen Hotel. For a malignant narcissist, this would have been extremely humiliating to know that there was someone out there that witnessed what you did. Brian may have believed that Kylen was the one who called 911 on August 12th because Kylen worked at the Moonflower Grocery Co-op. It's a tiny co-op, and she was the cashier that day, August 12th. We know from Brian's behavior at the Mary Piglet Mexican Grill, where he was reported as going inside and outside numerous times to fight with the hostess, that Brian has a temper. We also know from Chris, the 911 caller on August 12th, that Brian was seen slapping Gabby, so we know Brian may have had a motive to get rid of Kylen. The reason, in my opinion, is that Brian believed Kylen called the police on him on August the 12th and didn't know that it was a 911 caller who was a male that we only know his first name, Chris. Look how tiny the Moonflower Grocery Co-op is. So we know Brian would have seen Kylen. We've also learned that Brian probably had the means to commit this crime. In my opinion, Brian was involved in the homicide of Gabby and the subsequent cover-up. We have proof in the form of a photo of Gabby holding a gun, which provides Brian with the tool he needed to commit the double homicide of Kylen and Crystal. Brian was taken by Moab police to the Bowen Motel, which is just around the corner from Woody's Tavern, where Kylen and Crystal were last seen on August 13th. We know Brian also hitchhiked around Moab after Gabby disappeared. We know Brian ran to Mommy and Daddy's house in Northport, Florida in Gabby's van after Gabby's homicide. In a bizarre move, Brian also went to Florida on August 17th, right after Crystal and Kylen were reported as missing. We know Brian Laundrie's parents' attorney, Stephen Bertolino, disclosed a change in the reason Brian flew home to Florida from August 17th to the 24th. What we do not know is the real reason why. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you for watching.